بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد. Brothers and sisters, so welcome back. We're just going to continue on from where we were last week, inshallah. I'll try and give a quick recap. Just a reminder of the new well, we haven't really changed the format, but we're now broadcasting the live stream on YouTube instead of Facebook. So just keep that in mind, and if anybody asks, basically that's where it is now. Although I will take the extra 5 minutes or so it requires to share it on the Facebook, to share the YouTube stream on the Facebook page. So I'll do that anyway, inshallah. So hopefully people will get the message. Yeah, so we're going to continue on from last week. So last week was a recap anyway, because I had restarted after that long layoff due to COVID, well, me getting COVID, and somewhat kind of a summarized repeat of what we discussed in the session before that month-long break. So today we can inshallah continue on. So Imam Muhasibi basically was talking about the fact that we all understand that as Muslims, as believers, we have duties that we recognize as our duties as Muslims, right? What Imam Muhasibi is doing is he's breaking down these duties and articulating them in terms of so he's going down to a very granular level, and he's saying that you have to understand duties in terms of duties upon individual limbs, individual organs of the body. And if you look at it in that granular way, then you'll do better in terms of guarding yourself from, well, guarding the obligations of your limbs on the one hand, but also guarding yourself from sins committed by your limbs, because of the fact that you're much more self-aware, right? And you've thought about things to a detailed level. So this whole section, what he's doing is he's talking about the fara'id of individual limbs, right? And he's speaking about it in terms of there are fara'id, then there are muharramat, so things that are fard that you have to do for individual limbs, and then things that are haram, things that are in between that are permissible, and then also things that are ambiguous, and it's virtuous to be cautious with regards to those ambiguous matters. And last week we spoke about the obligations of the heart. All right, so in terms of, obviously in terms of limbs, we're talking about things that are fard upon the heart and things that are haram for the heart to do, to indulge in, and things that are kind of in between. And a lot of the heart is the leader of all of the organs, as the hadith says. And a lot of what he spoke about with regards to the heart were acts that are more to do with our attitude, right? Our akhlaq, our outlook, our worldview, the way we think, and the way we perceive things, the way we perceive others. All right. So he spoke, for example, about having a good opinion of others when things are a little bit unclear or things are ambiguous. He spoke about ikhlas and things like that. So these are all matters of the heart, but matters of the heart are not, I mean, we tend to be a bit reductionist, and we tend to reduce matters of the heart to things that are tangible to us, but matters of the heart go beyond that, right? And matters of the heart are all of the akhlaq of the heart, or everything that can be classed as the conduct of the heart. So sincerity, trusting in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, hatred and dislike for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, generosity, compassion. Feelings, for example, things that are more to do with feelings, are desires, likes and dislikes. These are all matters to do with the heart, right? So therefore, when the Prophet ﷺ teaches that لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يكون هواه تبعا لما جئت به, right? In a very strong hadith, he says that none of you truly believes until his desires become subservient to, or his desires come in accordance with what I have brought, i.e. the Sharia, meaning you cannot truly believe until your desires are aligned with the Sharia of Islam, with what the Prophet ﷺ brought, with the Quran, the Sunnah, right, and the ahkam of Islam, the rulings of Islam. Similarly, the Prophet ﷺ said, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. Here it's about likes, right, what to like. And he says, none of you can truly believe until you like for your brother what you like for yourself. He said, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى أكون أحب إليه من والده وولده والناس أجمعين. None of you can truly believe until I am more beloved to him than his father, his child, and all people. So this is a duty of the heart. The ulama, when they discuss these issues, they discuss them not in terms of airy-fairy kind of nice to have things, but they discuss these things as requirements of Iman, because the Prophet ﷺ speaks in very, very emphatic terms. He says, none of you believes until, and therefore these things are obligations, even though they may be abstract in nature, they may be subtle, they may be difficult to kind of pinpoint, perhaps difficult to even know when one's achieved it. And this is why ulama have gone to great lengths to try to articulate them for people in a manner that's at least somewhat quantifiable. So for example, the ulama speak about the fact that love for the Prophet ﷺ is not the obligatory love for the Prophet ﷺ is not, it cannot be the kind of love that a person naturally feels for their parents and their children, because of the fact that that is a love that has a lot of direct contact, that comes from a lot of direct contact. A mother giving birth to the child, that child growing up with the mother and seeing the parents all the time and recognizing instinctively the bond that exists between them, and the love and affection that they have for their parents because of what they do for them, because of how dependent they are upon them, and so on and so forth. This is very natural. This is fitri, right? And ulama explained that when as an act of the heart, a person is required to love the Prophet ﷺ, it is not this natural love that is required, but an acquired love. That people have to learn to love the Prophet, that it is obligatory to learn to love the Prophet ﷺ by understanding how people are loved, by acquiring the knowledge of the Prophet ﷺ that will bring us to acquire the love of him, which if that cannot be achieved without discussing his good characteristics, discussing his favors, knowing and discussing his good favors upon us, upon the ummah, upon humanity, without knowing and discussing and constantly reminding ourselves of the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, even his physical attributes and so on. If that is what is required to acquire love of the Prophet ﷺ, then that is what a person is obligated to do until that love is achieved, right? So I never mentioned this last week, which is why I'm bringing it up today. This is actually a very good example of something that is a more kind of obviously an obligation, but clearly an action of the heart, a fard of the heart, but very subtle and abstract in terms of recognizing both what exactly is expected of us, but also how can we acquire something that is so abstract, that is so intuitive, that is so instinctive in the more natural contexts, right? Particularly where that physical, that direct connection doesn't exist. There is a 1400-year gap in time between us and the object of our love, whereas all loves that we recognize are loves that that bound us through some sort of direct interaction, some sort of direct contact. All right. So and you can go on, you know, the to be generous and save ourselves from miserliness is an act of the heart and a duty of the heart, and its opposite, miserliness, is something that one is to guard against, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this, and he says, وَمَنْ يُوقَ شُحَّ نَفْسِهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. Whoever is protected from the miserliness of his heart, then such people are the successful. And so on and so forth. You can go on to talk about many other characteristics. Mercy, right? You know, Ar-Rahimuna yarhamuhum ar-Rahman, right? La yarhamullahu man la yarhamun nas. Allah is not merciful towards a person who is not merciful towards people. If you know, that's a trait that a person has to acquire, otherwise they cannot be the object of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it seems so obvious, right? But how many people sit and reflect on whether or not they are merciful, or the measure? How many of us sit and reflect on the measure of our mercy, the level of our mercy? We don't. Yet, this is an obligation of the heart, an obligation, an inner obligation. Yeah. So very important to reflect on this more and more. What are the internal obligations? And that's pretty much the doorway that Imam Muhasibi is opening up for us for our reflection. This is what we have to think about, right? So there's the fara'id on the one hand, then there's the negatives on the other hand, the muharramat on the other hand, right? I mentioned miserliness, but also hatred, you know, hasad, jealousy. And these are things that are haram. You know, looking at people with unwarranted and unjustified suspicion, you know, and so on. These are all things that are among the muharramat of the things that fall upon that would fall under the category of the duties of the heart. Okay, inshallah ta'ala. Just trying to remind myself. Imam Muhasibi also mentions things like, in those of you who were here last week, you'll remember he mentioned things like fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fearing his punishment on the one hand, and hoping for the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the other hand, as duties of the heart. Okay. So the next, so we already discussed that last week. I added a little bit to it today. The next bit, which I will read in Arabic first, is to do with the obligation or the fara'id of the tongue, right? So we're moving from the mother organ, if you like, the master organ, the heart, onto another important organ, which is the tongue. So Muhasibi says, وَفَرْضُ اللِّسَانِ الصدق في الرضا والغضب وكف الأذى في السر والعلانية وترك التزيد بالخير والشر. وقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: من ضمن لي ما بين لحييه وما بين رجليه ضمنت له على الله الجنة. وقال رسول الله صلى الله تعالى عليه وسلم لمعاذ بن جبل رضي الله عنه: وهل يكب الناس في النار على مناخرهم إلا حصائد ألسنتهم. وقال صلى الله عليه وسلم: أنذركم فضول الكلام حسب أحدكم ما يبلغ به حاجته فإن الرجل يسأل عن فضول كلامه كما يسأل عن فضول ماله. وقال صلى الله عليه وسلم: إن الله عند لسان كل قائل فاتق الله امرؤ علم ما يقول. I'll stop there, inshallah. Just let's move forward one by one. So that's what he said in the Arabic text. That's what he said about the obligations of the tongue. Yeah. And then the next one is the obligations of sight, of the eyes. Okay, so let's translate that and discuss that, inshallah. So he says, he says, and the obligation of the tongue, or the fard of the tongue, the word is as you know it. We all know the word fard. It is as we know it, like the fard of salah, in the same, exactly in the same. The reference is exactly the same. So the fard of the tongue is truthfulness in situations where one is pleased and angry. So there is a situation in which a person is required to tell the truth. The fard of the tongue is to tell the truth whether or not one is pleased or displeased with that situation or with the person. So it's not a case of I don't like you, so I'm going to lie and make your life difficult, or or something or other. But rather, telling the truth is, in most situations, with very, very, very rare exceptions, is unconditional, right? So therefore, we tell the truth always, whether we are facing a situation in which we are happy and pleased, or we are upset and angry, or facing a person with whom we are in dialogue or we are dealing. Whether we like the person or we don't like the person, we tell the truth, right? So it could be in dealings. It could actually be in a transaction, right? You're selling a car to someone that you like, a friend, a family member, or somebody who's giving you positive vibes. You like the person's rubbed off on you positively, right? And so now you're being really, really honest and genuine about the faults of the car and about what's good about it, but also about what's wrong about it, so that you don't want this person to be let down, to be ripped off by you. But you don't know the person maybe doesn't give you the right vibes, doesn't like that, you don't like the way they come across and so on. So you're like, what, if this person's done a bit of harm, I don't mind. So therefore I'm going to perhaps gloss over some of the scratches in the car, or some of the serious body work that I've done and the paint work, etc. That kind of, what I mean. So that's the point. The point is that it's unconditional in both of those circumstances. It is obligatory to tell the truth, and you can think of any number of scenarios in which people may just kind of bend the truth, tell a lie, etc. These are as important. Telling the truth in these situations, are as important as praying your Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, and Isha. Okay, inshallah. So وَالصِّدْقُ فِي الرِّضَى وَالْغَضَبِ, and then he says وَكَفُّ الْأَذَى فِي السِّرِّ وَالْعَلَانِيَةِ, and desisting from or avoiding causing harm in secret and in the open, right? So you can interpret in secret as behind somebody's back, causing harm while that person is unaware that you are doing them harm. And alaniya is basically when you're in front of others, or when you're in front of the person who you're doing harm to, or it can mean in private and in public, right? Kaful adha fi sirri wal alaniya, so avoiding causing any harm in private as well as in public. And here, remember, we're talking about the obligation of the tongue, right? So these are the things that are obligatory upon the tongue. That means that the harm here that's being discussed is the harm that can be caused by the tongue. So what are all of the ways in which we might do that with our tongues, right? So an easy example is backbiting. Backbiting is a form of causing harm, right? Because usually it is done in front of another, and it influences somebody else's opinion of another, of a third person. So there's yourself, there's the backbiter, there's the second person who the backbiter is speaking to or backbiting to, and then there is the third person who is the subject or the topic of the backbiting. And it is backbiting or ghiba if it is true. The Prophet ﷺ, he explained that when he was discussing backbiting, a Sahabi asked him, what if what I am saying about the person is true, if I am saying something bad about the person, but it is indeed true that they are like that. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "In kana fihi ma taqulu faqad ightabta." If they are as you say, then you have backbited. وَإِن لَمْ يَكُنْ فِيهِ مَا تَقُولُ فَقَدْ بَهَتَّ. If they are not as you say, if the fault that you are discussing doesn't exist in them, if the quality that you are criticizing them with is not in them, then it's another sin, right? You have committed slander against them. So the Prophet himself, in his own words, has clarified what backbiting is and what it isn't, and what the alternative possibility is. Both of those two things that the Prophet ﷺ mentions in this hadith are forms of causing harm with the tongue, right? And they apply whether it's done publicly or whether it's done privately. Whether a person is slandered in public or in private, or in some private forum, in some way unknown, in some way not discovered, you know, like nowadays an anonymous message online or something of that nature. Something released, and that kind of thing. All of these things are forms of causing harm, either in public or in private. So, like I said, ghiba is a simple example, and it's an often used example, but a very important one, because it's something that we have to be constantly reminded of, because we do it almost. I mean, yes, it's an exaggeration, but you get my point, right? Almost as frequently as we breathe, right? Ghiba just flows without us realizing it, and we do it with justifications. Like, we feel like we are justified because everybody who's in that gathering, everybody that you are talking to, you have there is a common denominator between you, which is that you don't like that person. But you not liking that person, or me not liking that person, is not a justification for ghiba. It is still ghiba. The thing that we are saying about the person being true does not justify ghiba. It is still ghiba. And it is a form of causing harm. Why? Because it entrenches bad opinion about the other person, when, as we said, that one of the obligations of the heart is to try to maintain a good opinion of another. Yeah. So, and now you can go on, right? Other examples. So whether it's mocking people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade that in the Quran. Whether it is abusing people, swearing at them, using profane language towards them, all of these things are forms of abuse, right? Forms of abuse are basically harsh words, that unjustified harsh words that come from one's tongue. The opposite, what is required of the tongue, is for a person to be gentle, right? The Prophet ﷺ was ordered to be gentle to Fir'aun. Musa alayhi salam, rather, the prophets Musa alayhi salam and Harun alayhim salam were both told to be gentle to Fir'aun, and the Prophet ﷺ was described as being soft towards the kuffar, and Allah said that had you not been soft and gentle, then they would have, your da'wah would not have been effective. They would have dispersed from around you. Right? So therefore, be forgiving. Fa'fu anhu wastaghfir lahum wa sha'wirhum fil amr. Forgive them, pardon them, seek forgiveness for them, and consult them even in your affairs. And he was talking about the people that were around him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So again, this is, so if you think of what is positively encouraged by the Sharia, then it becomes much easier to understand why the negative is so profoundly negative or so profoundly bad. Anyway, so the Prophet ﷺ basically is speaking just generally about causing any kind of harm with the tongue, whatever form it may take. And nowadays, just, you know, it takes so many forms. Now, the same goes for things that are an extension of the tongue, right? So now, particularly, this has to be said in the modern era. The tongue is the organ with which we communicate, right? And therefore, the writing is an extension of that, right? Text messages, WhatsApp messages, communicating through social media, all of these things are extensions of the tongue, because they are extensions of the organ of communication. So therefore, any form of harm communicated about another person is also something that must be avoided as a fard, and the opposite of it would be haram. Causing harm to someone using a means of communication is haram, right? The only exception would be like for the classical scholars, one of the exceptions was if they were commenting on somebody as a narrator of hadith, and they had to comment on the fact that this person is dishonest when narrating hadith, for example, right? Or if a person had to be reported, their fault had to be reported because the fault that they had was something that was publicly harmful, right? For example, it was something that could endanger people, endanger the community, endanger society, endanger the individual, right? For example, a person's intent to murder, right, or kill. So those are some of the exceptions in which, going and reporting that person is an act that causes them harm, but it is justified. But otherwise, one of the other exceptions that ulama talk about is if you have been consulted about, if somebody has come to you for information about another person who is being considered for marriage. So somebody that you've been approached and asked about them, right? And it's for marriage. Here as well, you need to be honest about that person. And if you have honestly said something about them that isn't positive, which normally you would not have mentioned, you would have hidden, right? Here it's not classed as backbiting if you use the backbiting example, because of the fact that you're required here to tell the truth about that person, even though it's negative and it's behind their back, right? Anyway, you can, if you want to ask any clarifying questions about that, you can, inshallah, now or later. And then he says, وَتَرْكُ التَّزَيُّدِ بِالْخَيْرِ وَالشَّرِّ, and also one has to avoid, I think this is an extension of what he said before. He said avoid kind of my understanding of this particular word is that he's talking about just storing up, just accumulating good and bad actions through the tongue, right? Just avoid that build-up of little sins committed by the tongue. And this is now very clearly articulated in some of the citations that he now will make. So for example, he starts off by saying, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, whoever guarantees to me what is between their jaws and what is between their legs, I guarantee for them Jannah. Right? So man yadman li, there's different wordings of this, but there is, this is a sahih hadith narrated in Sahih Bukhari. The Prophet ﷺ basically said, whoever guarantees that they will guard the actions of that which is between their jaws, i.e. their tongue, and that which is between their legs, i.e. their private parts, i.e. whoever can guarantee their chastity, I guarantee them Jannah. Right? So Jannah is guaranteed for a person who can be mindful of what they say, and who can remain chaste, right? Avoid adultery, avoid zina, avoid fornication, these kind of things. And then he also says, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in another hadith, وَهَلْ يَكُبُّ النَّاسَ فِي النَّارِ عَلَى مَنَاخِرِهِمْ إِلَّا حَصَائِدُ أَلْسِنَتِهِمْ, that is it anything else that that pushes a person down into the fire on their noses except what they harvest with their tongues, i.e. if there's nothing else that pushes a person face down into the fire, into Jahannam, except for the sins that they commit with their tongues. Hasaidu al-sina. Hasaid are things that you harvest, the crops that your crops are your hasaid, right? What you harvest basically. And here that kind of thing is being used as a metaphor for what we say, what we speak, right? You know, the sins of our tongues. And the reason, perhaps one of the reasons for that particular metaphor is that crops, things that are described as hasaid or crops, tend to be abundant. You know, like a rice crop or a wheat crop, they tend to be abundant, or a date crop, they tend to be abundant. And that's exactly how the sins of the tongue are, as far as the way people behave. And that's why we have to be particularly careful about them, because they are serious. Anyway, and then he says, and all the Messenger of Allah also says, "Unzirukum fudul al-kalam," that I warn you about excess and unnecessary speech, right? You know, just you know, like just rattling on about anything, right? Shooting one's mouth off about any person, any matter, you know, whether it concerns me or doesn't concern me, whether it matters or doesn't matter, whether it's important or unimportant, just going on and on and on, right? So the Prophet ﷺ, he's saying that the Prophet ﷺ says, "Unzirukum fudul al-kalam," I warn you about, you know, about excess kind of idle talk. "Hasbu ahadikum ma yablughu bihi hajatahu," that which is sufficient for your necessities is enough, right? There's no need to go beyond what is necessary to say, because a person is going to be questioned on the Day of Judgment about their excess speech, or their excesses in their speech. فإن الرجل يسأل عن فضول كلامه كما يسأل عن فضول ماله. In exactly the way that they will be asked on the Day of Judgment, or questioned on the Day of Judgment about the excesses of wealth. Like most people understand and know and recognize that on the Day of Judgment we will have to give account for our excess wealth, right? Particularly where, you know, zakah hasn't been paid, etc., where its duties haven't been paid, meaning there is going to be a reckoning for wealth, because of the fact that part of the test of life is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests us with what he endowed, what he gave us, what he endowed us, what he gifted us. And if that's wealth, then we are going to be asked about it on the Day of Judgment. And he's saying that in exactly the same way, in excess speech, right, is stocking up, right? Like money, it's stocking up, and people will be asked about it on the Day of Judgment. Now, although Imam Muhasibi says this is a hadith, this in fact is the statement of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu. So it's actually not a hadith. Technically, it's called an athar of a sahabi. So it's not, you know, it's not. I mean, we get the point. The meaning is correct, but it's not a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then he also says that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Inna Allah inda lisani kulli qa'ilin," that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there and alert to the speech of every speaker, every person, everything that a person says. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is alert to it, and the person who can be mindful of what they say has indeed feared Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, i.e. the person who is mindful of what they say, the literal meaning here is alima ma yaqul, who knows what they say, meaning they don't speak without awareness, without mindfulness, right? Who knows what they say, who is aware of what they say, then such a person has indeed achieved taqwa, right? Because taqwa is to be mindful and conscious, right, of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore being mindful of what we say is a manifestation of taqwa. So such a person has attained taqwa. فَاتَّقَ اللَّهُ امْرُؤٌ عَلِمَ مَا يَقُولُ. And this is a hadith narrated from Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu. You know, in various collections there is some weaknesses in it, but again its meaning is supported by other hadith. Its meaning is valid. And then after that, Imam Muhasibi goes on to talk about the obligations of the eyes. Okay, so these are the obligations of the tongue. You know, so the tongue is, it's a very small organ, right? But it's powerful. Words are powerful. It represents communication. It represents, you know, relationships. It's what we judge people with. You know, sometimes thoughts are just thoughts, right? They're nothing, but they're abstract, but they become substance the moment they are pronounced as words, or they are communicated in some other way. So therefore, the tongue is an extremely dangerous organ, but also an extremely valuable asset if it is used in the right way, because the same tongue recites, recites the Shahada, recites the Quran, makes dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, praises Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, praises the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, expresses words of love, expresses positive praise of people, encourages people, encourages positive behavior, gives da'wah. The same tongue does all of those things as well. So it is one of our strongest assets, as well as one of our greatest threats when it comes to our salvation, if we are not careful about how we use it. So I still have time, so I'm going to inshallah carry on. Any question? If there's any questions so far, you can fire away. I'll keep an eye out, inshallah. I'll keep an eye on any questions on the stream as well. I'm not usually used to it, but I'm working on it, inshallah. Okay, barakallahu fikum. So so the Imam Muhasibi says, وَفَرْضُ الْبَصَرِ الْغَضُّ عَنِ الْمَحَارِمِ وَتَرْكُ التَّطَلُّعِ فِيمَا حُجِبَ وَسُتِرَ. قال حذيفة رضي الله عنه قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم النظر سهم من سهام إبليس فمن تركه من خوف الله أتاه الله إيمانا يجد حلاوته في قلبه. وقال أبو الدرداء رضي الله عنه من غض بصره عن النظر الحرام زوج من الحور العين حيث أحب ومن اطلع فوق بيوت الناس حشره الله يوم القيامة أعمى. وقال داود الطائي لرجل وقد أحد النظر إلى بعض من ينظر إليه فقال يا هذا أردد بصرك إليك فإنه بلغني أن الرجل يسأل عن فضول نظره كما يسأل عن فضول عمله ويقال لك النظرة الأولى وليست لك الآخرة فما هجم على النظر فهو موضوع عن العبد وما استبد به النظر بمعقول الفهم فالعبد مأخوذ به. Okay, inshallah. So I'll stop there. Hopefully we can get through that. Okay. All right, just scrolling back. So he says, and so again, quickly repeating the context, right? So we're talking about the obligations of individual organs. What is obligatory upon each individual organ? So we've spoken about the heart, we've spoken about the tongue, and now we're talking about the eyes or sight, right? What is obligatory upon one's sight. So he says, وَفَرْضُ الْبَصَرِ, the obligation or the fard of the sight is to be lowered from that which is haram. Right? Al-ghaddu anil maharim, i.e. to be lowered, or rather averted. I think averted is a better word, right? So the obligation of the sight is for it to be averted from that which is haram, i.e. avert it from things that are manifestations of haram or things that are haram to behold, haram for it to look at, to see. وَتَرْكُ التَّطَلُّعِ فِيمَا حُجِبَ وَسُتِرَ. Now this one's really, really interesting. And very much speaks to kind of some serious issues in our modern, postmodern context, right? And he says one of the obligations of sight is to avoid seeking to know that which has been concealed and hidden. Basically, can anyone think of like a good colloquial word for this, right? A good kind of easy, simple word for it. You know, I have one, right? And that is being a nosy Parker, basically. So that's basically what he's talking about, being nosy, Yeah. So وَتَرْكُ التَّطَلُّعِ فِيمَا, especially, I mean, one thing is knowing things that are out in the open because it can't be avoided. Another is to be constantly in the business of seeking out people's secrets, right? And the problem is that we live in a tabloid culture. We live in social media culture where people are constantly exposing other people's secrets, especially not real secrets, not serious secrets, not harmful secrets, not secrets to protect society from something dangerous or anything like that. No, just we're obsessed with wanting to know things about people that they don't want to tell us or they don't want us to know, right? And there are multi-million pound industries that basically are built on just this one thing, right, which is exposing people's secrets. And that's basically the whole tabloid industry, right? So, and then you have a new industry in recent times that's developed, which is about making one's life public, right? So that haya is completely removed and the requirements of haya are completely removed, and people just reality TV, right? So it's completely gone the other way. So the kind of the teaching of Islam is saying that the fard of the site is to avoid seeking to know, avoid being nosy basically about things that are hidden and concealed. If there is something that a person has not exposed, doesn't want people to know, and it probably is going to be something that they're embarrassed about. It's not perhaps something that they're concealing out of humility, but it's a great deed. It's and so on. But rather, it is something that they are concealing because they're embarrassed about it. They're concealing it because it's a fault, it's a flaw. They're concealing it because it's something that's wrong and they're trying to get past it, right? But but like, I want to know it just to know it, right? That's it. I just want that bit of dirt on that person. This and then to take pleasure in kind of chatting about it and discussing it in friend circles. Oh, do you know? So now you go from, so he's saying, like, if so, remember, in the context, what are we talking about here? This is in the context of the actions of the eyes, right? Of sight. So what we're basically saying is, in real life, how that would play out is, if your eyes happen to fall upon something that actually a person is trying to hide, it's an accidental gaze. You've looked at something that a person doesn't intend to expose, a person doesn't intend to reveal, right? Then a person should not desire to want to know that, right? So if that isn't, that kind of borders on an action of the heart now, right? Because one of the actions of the heart is tarkut tajassus, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah Al-Hujurat, right? وَلَا تَجَسَّسُوا. And the Prophet ﷺ, speaks about tajassus as well. And he talks about la tadabaru. The Prophet ﷺ forbade going behind each other to seek each other's faults. So there's an overlap here. But what does it mean specifically for the gaze? What it means specifically for the gaze is, even if you happen to see something that is private in somebody's life, it's a private sin, or it's their aura, right? A person has caught a glimpse of somebody in their window and they're not properly covered and so on. It is obligatory to look away. It is fard to look away and haram to continue to look. A person may have that first glance, as Imam Muhasibi will say later, that first accidental glance, but they must avert their eyes if what they are looking at is haram, or if what they are looking at is something that a person would want to conceal, right? Like, people, there is this, if like we live in a culture, right, where everybody just wants to stare. Everybody wants to look, everybody wants to stare, everybody wants to know everything, right? We have to resist that culture and be confident about who we are and be different. Okay, inshallah. Not just be different, but be confidently different. So again, reiterating, right? Not seeking to know things that are concealed and not revealed. And what that basically means is, as far as the eyes are concerned, it's to avert. It's to avert if you've noticed something that somebody wants to hide. And let me just add one little thing. And now I'm going a bit too far because we're going to run out of time. So I'll add one little thing, right? In many instances, this applies with children as well. If you notice your children doing something and they're trying to hide it, right? Don't blanket embarrass them. Make a judgment call. The first time it happens, let them, if they are trying to hide it, it means they're embarrassed by it. Let them keep that secret, right? You know, make note of it, but let them keep that secret. It's only if you feel they're moving towards kind of addictive tendencies, or if it's moving towards a habit and so on and so forth, then maybe you can intervene. Or you can intervene, but don't intervene in that moment, right? But speak of it in vague terms. Don't let them know that you saw them. Oh, you know, this is really, really bad. And Umar, son, I saw you do it the other day. You know, it's really, really bad to not clean yourself after using the toilet. And Zaid, I saw you do it. That's really bad. That's really bad parenting. And because sometimes with children, we have to kind of apply the rules that the Prophet ﷺ taught us as mature adults, and then kind of make necessary adjustments. But the basic principle remains the same, right? Because if a child is constantly embarrassed, right, about their flaws or about mistakes that they make, then eventually they just become desensitized, right? And in the end, they just do it. They don't feel embarrassed about it anymore, because because the most powerful embarrassment is to be embarrassed within yourself, right? That's the most powerful one. A person does something wrong, but they themselves, they feel embarrassed, not because of someone else. They are ashamed that they have done that. That's the most powerful one, and that is eroded when they're constantly exposed, right? Or when they're constantly told off in front of others. So this thing applies with children as well, not just with adults. With adults, it becomes a matter of obligation. With children, sometimes tactically it may be necessary to intervene, but in private, like golden rule with children, right? Don't make it a habit of telling children off in front of others. Okay, in an extreme situation, something really bad, something really dangerous has happened. That's an exception. You make an exception. It can't be the rule to embarrass children in front of their siblings, or in fact embarrass children in front of others, right? To tell them off in front of other people. All right. The rule is to either tactically ignore, right? And just, or stop them kind of in secret, discreetly stop them, okay? Or have a quiet word with them. Take them aside and have a quiet word with them. Because if as parents and adults, if we don't protect the dignities of children and maintain their feeling of haya, right, then who else is going to do it? Then we ourselves with our own hands will erode their haya. Okay, really, really important, inshallah. And then he says, حذيفة رضي الله عنه says, قال حذيفة رضي الله عنه says, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, النظر سهم من سهام إبليس فمن تركه من خوف الله آتاه الله إيمانا يجد حلاوته في قلبه. That the sight, or the gaze rather, if you like, is one of the arrows of the shaitan, of Iblis. Whoever abandons it fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant him such a powerful iman, such powerful faith, that he will find, or he will experience the sweetness of that iman in his heart. He will experience the sweetness of that faith in his heart. Okay, that is the power of not necessarily doing something, but the power of avoidance, the power of avoiding that the harmful or the sinful gaze. That's obviously what the hadith is talking about, right? Abu Darda radiallahu anhu says, whoever averts his gaze from looking at the haram, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is, you know, speaking in the context of the reward of hurul ain in Jannah, of beautiful maidens in Jannah. He says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward them with a spouse from the hurul ain in Jannah. And وَمَنِ اطَّلَعَ فَوْقَ بُيُوتِ النَّاسِ حَشَرَهُ اللَّهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ أَعْمَى. And whoever seeks to know, or whoever kind of noses around or spies over the homes of people, right? Keeps an eye on what's going on in people's gardens, right? Looks into people's windows, you know, that kind of thing. So whoever does things like that, he says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will punish him by raising him blind on the day of judgment. So really, really harsh word. One of the interesting things about mentioning the reward of a woman in Jannah is perhaps because the wandering gaze tends to be a bigger problem among men, right? The wandering haram gaze, i.e. looking at women when they're not supposed to, or looking at women in a haram way, right? And dare I say it, you know, the same goes for inappropriate images and billboards and pornography and all of those things. You know, if you look at the statistics, you know, the overwhelming majority, in the 80 and 90% consumers of pornography are men, right? And the overwhelming majority of the subject of pornography, the people who are photographed and who are shown in all of their nakedness, are women. And that says something about our makeup, right? And about genders, and you know, women tend to look at women, right? You know, women pick up fashion magazines and look at women, right? But anyway, so this is all the, so this is all, this all falls under that category. I mean, it's a massive problem, but it all falls under that category of the haram gaze. It's a massive problem in the Muslim world as well. When the internet kind of found its way in the Muslim world, the majority of internet use was pornographic. And I specifically read those stats about India, about Pakistan and Bangladesh. I mean, it's a terrible tragedy, but it is something that men struggle with. And it's interesting also that in the hadith, the reward is very male. The men, I mean, it doesn't mean that women aren't rewarded for protecting their gaze. Of course they are. But the reward mentioned here is directly targeting men, because they have a greater tendency to commit that sin. Okay. And then the whole kind of spying and looking into people's homes and looking into people's gardens and see what they're up to and all that. People who do that as a habit, it's a terrible habit. And if they do it particularly with the intention of knowing what's going on, right? Knowing what people are up to, seeing if they can catch something, you know, about people's true character. And it said this tendency to spy, the Prophet ﷺ said that he will be raised on the day of judgment blind. And the Prophet ﷺ said in this other hadith, Imam Muhasibi doesn't mention it here, I'm mentioning it. In another hadith, he talks about authority. To people in authority, he said, "Man ittaba awrati an-nasi afsadtahum." Whoever seeks out the secrets of people, whoever seeks out the hidden flaws of people, he will destroy them. Meaning that even as a state, as a judge, as the police and so on, spying on people will ultimately destroy them. Right. So so people in authority, I've already talked about parents, right? Teachers, same thing. Right? It is a destructive tendency to kind of justify spying on people in order to know their hidden faults. Right? It is different when people do things publicly and when people do things that are harmful to public. That's a different scenario, right? That should be exposed and reported, not exposed for the sake of backbiting, but exposed for the sake of taking action and stopping that public harm or that criminal behavior. Okay. Dawood al-Ta'i said to a man who had looked who had given a harsh look at someone else, right? So one person looked at another and that person kind of looked back, basically gave them a dirty look. So to the man who gave the dirty look, Dawood al-Ta'i said, who is a pious person from the earlier generations, he said, "Ya hada," he's, you know, like, "Ya hada," he's like saying, excuse me, right? Take that gaze back. Urdud basaraka ilayk. Take your gaze back, right? Because I have heard, فَإِنَّهُ بَلَغَنِي, I have heard that a man will be asked and questioned on the day of judgment about unnecessary and trivial gaze, about the unnecessary and trivial gaze. The way he will be asked about you know, kind of irrelevant and trivial actions, wasteful excess actions, right? He uses the same word as the same word fudul, which we use when we were talking about words, right? And it will be said to him, and it said that you may have the first glance, but you can't have the next. This is actually this is quoted normally in the context of a person that the first haram gaze, that accidental gaze, if you like, that a person can have that first gaze, but then after they avert, there should be no need for them to look back. But Dawta'i kind of using it in this context as well, that if you've accidentally looked at a person in the wrong way, like in this case, the person's kind of given a sharp stare at a person, or a dirty look towards a person, or a harsh look at a person, then stop it straight away and don't do it again. Then he finally concludes by saying, if something is accidental, then that is forgiven. That does not count. You know, accidentally falls, or accidentally something, it's unintentional. You know, it seems like you're giving a person a dirty gaze, but actually you're somewhere else, right? It's unconscious. So these kind of, if it's not deliberate, then it doesn't count. However, it is when it's deliberate and intentional, you know, and a person is doing it and they know what they're doing, they understand what they're doing, then that person is accountable for it and will be punished for it on the day of judgment. And then he goes on to talk about the obligations of hearing. So I've gone over a little bit because normally I allow people to at least ask questions. Okay, inshallah. I have a first question on YouTube. And somebody is saying that, yeah, so anybody that has questions, you know, in the classroom, or on YouTube or wherever, if you have a question, just type away and I'll quickly come to it very quickly. If you must go because it's already 7:30, then you know you can go, inshallah, no problem. Jazakumullahu khairan for listening, and I'll see you next week. Oh, you'll see me next week, however you want to put it. So there's a question. I'm 43 years old and want to study towards becoming a alim. Any suggestions? Okay. So first of all, it's never too late. So the fact that you're 43 years old really means nothing to me. I have had students studying the Islamic sciences who, when I was teaching them, they were older than me. They were kind of in their late 30s, early 40s, and so on. I've taught people who are in their 60s. So I taught people who were in their 60s when I was in my 30s, right? So it's never too late, first and foremost. Secondly, the intention for seeking knowledge should be seeking knowledge for the sake of bettering myself, bettering yourself, and for the sake of learning the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that one can practice it properly. And with that intention in mind, one can excel, right? And try to seek more and more knowledge to acquire the reward and the virtue of seeking knowledge. And then that will inevitably lead to a person eventually studying the Arabic language and studying tafsir and studying hadith and so on and so forth. And essentially, kind of growing in knowledge is actually something that naturally happens. And I'm not really warning you against this, but I'm just cautioning that learning with the intention of becoming something, becoming a alim, it's not necessarily bad, but it is it is something. It is nobody becomes a alim by completing a course. That's more of a social convention, meaning that a curriculum has been designed and it's become customary for people to regard a person as alim if they have completed this particular 6 or 7 year curriculum, right? But it isn't necessary for a person to complete that curriculum. They may traverse or walk the path of knowledge in their own way through private classes, and so on. The key principles of learning are that a person learns from teachers. They find reliable teachers, people who have knowledge and who have piety, and who are known for being strong teachers and good role models and good people of good knowledge and taqwa. And they learn from them rather than rely on self-taught methods, right? And it doesn't matter if you do that through private tuition, you take advice from a teacher who perhaps sets you a curriculum for yourself and you gradually work your way through that curriculum. And that perhaps is more practical considering people who are starting off at an older age, right? So, you know, if I was starting off in my 40s, perhaps it's easier for me to take private tuition from various teachers and work that around my life, around my job, around my family, my children, and so on, rather than carve out 7 years and go and study a curriculum in a Darul Ulum or an Islamic university, because that may not be practical. Okay, inshallah. So set the intention right, and then, you know, find good teachers. Nowadays, you know, there's online courses and things like that. If you want any specific advice, just email, you know, like maybe institutions and organizations that I can that to suggest. Then I can do that. Just send an email to info@mawaridlifestyle.com and I'll pick it up. But I mean, I suppose off the top of my head, if you wanted to study with an institution, then there's a Sunday only program at Salam Institute if you're looking for something really part-time. If you're looking for things that's something that's a bit more full on, then Ibrahim College has an excellent Arabic program. I used to run it. I used to run Ibrahim College, but I'm not there at the moment. But the Arabic program runs online at the moment. So you can check that out. So those are just two suggestions. Okay, but the main thing is, look, just learn as a lifelong commitment and keep doing it. See where it takes you. All right. There's no need to make any, you know, have any grand targets and so on. Just let it organically take you. But your objective should be to self-rectification and just increasing in knowledge for the fact that a seeker of knowledge is in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? To gain that great maqam, that grace, to achieve that station. Okay. Where are we? Somebody saying, Sheikh, what about scrolling through Instagram or social media feeds and, you know, haram subjects appearing on your feed after every 2 or 3 scrolls? What would you suggest we do? Like an obvious one is don't spend so much time on feeds. Like I mean, control it as best you can. I don't do Instagram. Most of the people on Twitter, I mean, like, why would you follow tons of people on Twitter, right? My Twitter feed is fairly clean, and almost every single feed that I get is from a reputable organization or from a scholar, from an alim, because they're the only people whose views I'm interested in, or academics, and they're the only people who I follow. So I don't, for the most part, unless somebody's deliberately trying to do something, that's all I get in my feed, right? My Facebook feed is similarly limited because I mean, I'm not particularly active on social media. You know, I try to benefit people and teach through it and so on. But if I do follow, I'm very, very careful about who I follow. I'm very, very careful about my privacy settings. So these things can be controlled and managed, right? And You know, if you want news, then follow news and things like that in ways that are more under your control. I wouldn't use social media. Social media should be for people. It should be for its purpose, isn't it? I mean, it shouldn't be just. It shouldn't be entertainment. It should be to engage, to connect with people and engage with people. And you should control who you engage with and who you connect with. All right, inshallah. If you're gonna have anything and everything on there, then anything and everything is gonna pop up on your feed. Maybe I mean, I could be wrong. I don't use it well enough to know how, and I don't use it enough to know how it works. But I would say that my feed is pretty much clean. I mean, I think YouTube is a greater concern. That is definitely, I think YouTube is definitely something that can't be controlled. And personally, even though I don't want to pay them the money, I have considered, and I probably will actually pay. I can't remember how much it is, but I found out recently. I saw the possibility recently, and just to avoid the adverts and things like that, you know, I might pay. I'm happy to pay the money if it stops me from, if I don't have to see ridiculous adverts popping up. All right. Otherwise, you know, basically know what you're after. I mean, I tend to, when I do get things on YouTube, I actually try to find out why. Like, why is that popping up? All right. And if there's an option for me to kind of block it in the future, then I block it. I mean, just take action. If you do that, then I guess, and if you're on social media for the right reasons and your behavior on social media is correct, and then something pops up, and then you take the right action to minimize that in the future, then inshallah ta'ala it will go down as a minor slip, and make istighfar, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive you, because it is still a sin to look at those things, but we'll make istighfar and we move away. But if our attitude is to indiscriminately kind of go through these feeds and not have no caution whatsoever, and then sometimes get curious about the things that appear and so on, then we are going to carry the sin. Okay, inshallah. Hope that's clear. Yeah. So if you're on social media to keep yourself to find things interesting and keep yourself updated, you're only going to get interesting stuff if you're following the right people. It's as simple as that. And the easier way to do that is to follow the right people directly. Anybody that is sharing good material on social media, they probably have a primary source somewhere, like a website where you can go to see their material. And social media is where they share it to just promote it. So rather than you finding on social media, if you find something that you're interested in, just go straight back to the source and then follow the person there. Number one. Number two, be specific about who you want to follow and follow them. Not just who you want to follow, who you want to follow and why. So if it's people of knowledge, why do you want to follow that particular person? Follow that person, right? And that's it. And you'll see that your feed is clean, right? You're not going to get reputable and credible information if you rely on social media for your information. It's as simple as that. At best, what you see on social media is anecdotal. It's only credible if it's from the social media account of someone credible. And if it's someone credible, then they've got a primary source, like their website. They're actually sharing something from their website. If I share something on social media, then it's if you follow me because that's what you know of me, then you might benefit from it. Or I've shared something useful that I have read, or I've shared something from my own website. So there is a primary source. Okay, inshallah ta'ala. Like, I've taught this class. Now I'm going to, if I share it on social media, it's because this is where it happens, right? So if somebody sees it on social media, they can then come back to the primary source, which is this class. They no longer have, then before you know it, you've got more than enough content, and you don't need to go and traverse through social media. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying control it. And I'm saying that's not where you get credible information from. All right. And if you're after credible information, then you will be very restricted in who you follow, and your feed will be limited. Right. And I'm telling you, because that's how I do it, and it works. Right? I have very limited information on my feed, and I only kind of, you know, I only follow people who I have a reason to follow, a friend, a family member, or, you know, if I have a public page, then, you know, I have one of those public pages so that people can benefit from me. But when it comes to my feed, it comes from the people that I follow, and I follow people who I can benefit from, or people that I actually know. Okay, inshallah. I hope that's beneficial. Already gone on for a while. Jazakumullahu khairan. And you know, the sister who said we need to train our eyes from a young age, yes. And even when we get old, we can retrain ourselves. You know, people, look, man, personal development is a multi-billion-dollar industry. People are developing themselves at mature age, paying money for it. You know, there's like an infinite number of courses online that are to do with personal development. This is become an industry. Why can't we as Muslims recognize that this is possible for us, and then basically go away and learn Islam and retrain ourselves to change our habits? Because that's what personal development is about, changing our habits, right? And obviously for those of us who have children who are young, start on them early and make sure they know how to navigate things like social media. Okay, inshallah. Jazakumullahu khairan. Allah bless you all. May Allah benefit all of us. May Allah benefit me. And please join me again next week. Same time, Monday, 6:30. Let others know about it. It'll be streamed on YouTube. And the actual Zoom class is free to enroll on. So just, you know, enroll if you want to, inshallah ta'ala. It's just go to the Facebook page or the website mawaridlifestyle.com, and the course is there in the courses section. Okay, Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.